Good evening. My name is James Sparks. I've worked in the criminal justice field for the past 30 years. I also am an adjunct professor where I teach serial homicide courses. I've been working with juveniles probably for the past 27 plus years, and I do that on a daily basis. Um, I'm married and I live in the South.
Me too. I'm in Georgia.
I'm one over from you.
All right.
To the left.
So, James, today we'll skip the clown business because I'm sure you get tired of talking about him. If that's okay.
Sure.
Okay, so can we start out with talking about Lucas and Toole and basically for those that are listening that aren't familiar with their crimes, which will be highly shocking if nobody is familiar with them. Can you basically just give like a brief summary on their cases and talk about how you got into meeting them, and then instead of using the MUR word, can you use the word unaliving because TikTok is dumb and like will issue bans and stuff, or like not bans like flags if you use the word the 187 word. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Okay, cool.
I wasn't aware of that, so thanks for letting me know.
Yeah.
Henry Lee Lucas and Ottis Toole were these team kill people that went around and I guess committed crimes all over the United States, and they were known for primarily serial unaliving people. And something that stands out about those two is they would use pretty much any means necessary that they had at their disposal. And what I mean by that is they would use their car, they would use ropes, they would use knives, they would use handguns, they would use basically anything that was close to them. And they ran around the country doing these sort of crimes. Uh, Otis was arrested first and put in Stark, Florida. And then Henry took off with Otis's niece, ended up eventually getting arrested in Texas, primarily after he unalived Otis's niece. And then once he was in custody, he um, made this sort of agreement with the police officers and the rangers. And what they wanted to do was sort of clear the books. So Henry was approached about clearing cold cases. And what he did was he started admitting that he was responsible for these crimes. And as a result, they were able to clear cases. But it was really one of those things that sort of got a lot of, but it was really one of those things that sort of got a lot of publicity towards the end because uh, he was, in a sense, almost coached. Uh, there are stories out there where he was asked about specific crimes, and it was based of the method that was used. And he would say one thing, and then they would follow up, say, "Are you sure it wasn't something else?" And he would follow up with what they had recommended, and that's how books or how the cases started getting cleared. And it pretty much came to a head on one situation where he was asked, "How did he and Otis unalive this individual?" And the case actually happened in Hawaii. And whenever they were waiting for Henry's response, he said, "Otis and I drove there." And after that was put out there, they pretty much knew that this was all a bunch of sort of just taking credit for things that really didn't happen.
Right. I didn't realize that about Hawaii. That's kind of funny. It goes to show that their intelligence level was not that high.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And you know, they probably, I think Otis's IQ was probably maybe in the 50s, and Henry's wasn't much higher, honestly. Henry, in a sense, was, I guess, the Otis was dominant in the relationship per se, even though you wouldn't take it like that when you see him. But yeah, Henry sort of appeased Otis in whatever he wanted to do in all situations. Otis was also pyromaniac. You know, he was just loved starting fires, and um, I think Henry just sort of went along where they met up in Florida, and then they just decided that they were going to go on this crime spree, and that's what happened ultimately. What gets real interesting about the case is, they were separated. Ottis was in Stark. He was at the prison there, and he started getting sick. And I think he died from pneumonia complications or liver or some sort of failure. There's all kinds of suggestions as to what it really was, but I don't think there's ever been any true release of the actual cause of his passing. And then Henry was in the state of Texas. Henry was there, and while he was there, of course, he, started corresponding with a gal from Missouri, and she ultimately became his girlfriend. And that's sort of how I ended up with a buddy of mine who was my writing partner at the time, ended up getting to visit Henry on death row.
So what was visiting him like?
Well, the time that we only got to visit him one time, it was a lot of red tape at the time. And then once we were allowed to visit, we had to go to Huntsville to death row. And on the day that we were scheduled to visit, it was supposed to be about a 6-hour visit. And we only got roughly 2 to 3 hours because they were actually having an execution on that day. So the prison was surrounded by just tons of news trucks. Reporters were everywhere, and the warden at the time was not very nice. I don't know if it was because of the situation that was happening that day, but he was very pushy, and he tried to rush along just the whole process for us.
That's interesting. Did the execution actually go through that day, or did they get a stay?
No, the person who was set to be executed, it actually happened that evening, yes.
Oh, okay. Dang, that's crazy. I'm sure there were tons of anti-death penalty activists and pro-death penalty and stuff like that outside protesting.
Yeah, you really didn't see too many protesters just because of the fact it was Texas, and back then, they were having quite a few. It was going back and forth between Texas and Florida and California. And now that's just, it's not as, you don't hear as much about it as you did back then. But, the problem that they run into now is whether or not they can get the substances to perform the lethal injections. And that's always been an issue now. I think here in Alabama, they've started switching to different forms of different gases. Which, we don't hear much about it when they make the reports in the news. It's sort of just like, a blip of what happened during the execution, but they really don't go into detail because I think there's arguments of whether or not it's cruel and unusual punishment.
Right. It's still basically they're still kind of toying with it, right? To see if it's effective or not while still using it, right?
Yes, and they really don't know because your subject is not going to be around to answer any questions about it.
Right. So that's pretty crazy.
I don't think they did enough research on it, to be honest with you.
Right. So speaking of Lucas and Tulle, before we talk about Walsh, I want to preface it with saying, a year ago, right? I purchased a letter of Henry Lucas's. It was one of his I'd say 2 or 3 years, maybe less, before he passed away. And in the letter, it says something it mentions Tulle and Walsh, and he says, "I believed Tulle unalived Walsh due to what he showed me at the time." And I'm assuming he's talking about a corpse or photos or something like that. So what are your thoughts on the Walsh situation? Because I know they've claimed Dahmer did it, and Tulle and Lucas and so many different other people. What are your thoughts on the Adam Walsh case in regard to Lucas and Tulle?
Yeah, I think that let's just remove Dahmer from the whole situation. I don't know where that story happened. I don't think that it's accurate. I don't think that it's something that you could go to the bank on. I just think that, whenever they started putting Dahmer, they started attaching Dahmer to all these cases, some cases in Germany, some places other than, Wisconsin. And then they said that he was in Florida at the time. I just don't buy it. I from what I understand and everything that I've ever read or researched, I think that Henry and Ottis were in Florida at the time, and I do believe that Ottis was in that Sears store where Adam was during the day, the day that he disappeared with his father, and I think it was the Sears and Roebuck in Hollywood, Florida at the time. And I think that Lucas has, not only in letters, but I think he's mentioned it multiple times that Ottis was responsible for it. The book, The Hand of Death, was primarily about Lucas and Ottis and about the cult-like activities that they were involved in. And I remember when Ottis was alive, when you would correspond with him, he used to put these little drawings in all the time. And, in some instances, he would put in recipes for barbecue sauce for humans. I think that Ottis is primarily responsible for that. It just makes more sense when you start doing the lines, from point A to point B. And I think that Henry got to the point where, he would go in hot and cold flashes. He would talk about it one minute and then he would sort of deny it the next. When we visited him that day, we were talking just primarily about his relationship with his girlfriend and all the things that they had done because, he had got his girlfriend to get a driver's license and pretty much say that she was Becky Powell, the person that he was responsible for killing, that ultimately landed on death row with orange socks. And his girlfriend went and got all this stuff, and she basically passed all the lie detector tests, saying that she was Becky Powell when everyone knew it wasn't. And I think that they were on television or something, and some people that knew his girlfriend grew up in the same hometown and said, "This is not Becky Powell, this is so-and-so," and which ultimately led to, this whole scam being uncovered. I think which led to Montel Williams, and Montel Williams sort of started talking about it. And then Henry sort of disassociated himself from his girlfriend for a period because he realized that the heat was going to be, coming down on him. One thing that I clearly remember when we're sitting in that visiting room and we were separated from Henry. In this situation, death row, we were separated by a wall, and Henry spoke through this glass that had the wire emaced inside of it. Whereas when I used to visit with Gacy, we sat down at basically a kitchen table together and sat across from each other. But whenever Henry started talking, we were talking about his cases. And, he was very, very adamant that there was going to be some major news released about his case. And we're like, the only thing that's going to be released about your case is the fact that, they're going to put you to death. And he said, no. He goes, I'm not responsible for any of these murders. And then he started saying that, he wasn't even responsible for the death of his own mother, which, that's been clearly brought out years ago based on the history and what happened with his mother. And, his mother, sort of the actions that she did, and his father, had to watch while she would do things with other men and things like this. And then everything that had been priorly documented about their case, he denied it. And when we started talking to him about specific cases, he would say, well, that didn't happen. There was no truth to that, or, I was just going along with what they wanted me to say about the homicides. But the one thing that really sticks out in that situation is he goes, there's going to be some news about my case come out. And we just started probing Henry about it. It's like, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? He goes, I just can't talk about it right now, but there's going to be some major news coming out about my case. And it was probably 4 or 5 months after we had that visit. Sure enough, was when Bush commuted his sentence and took him off death row because of the Orange Sox case and said that the information was not accurate and valid. And he knew whenever we visited him that day that he was going to be taken off death row. Of course, he was put in general population, and, what did he live, a year or two after that? And then he had the massive heart attack and passed away. But Lucas was already aware of what was going to happen in the case, and he knew that the state of Texas was not going to execute him. And I found that, who was very, very just sort of just a con, was able to get the court and even the governor of the state of Texas at the time to rule in his favor. And that just blows my mind.
Yeah, that is really crazy. Did you visit Toole as well, or did you just visit Lucas and just speak to Toole?
Just Lucas.
Oh, okay. You know who Mark Safrick is, right?
I don't know if I'm aware of that person.
He was, so long story short, he worked for Quantico, Virginia. He was a profiler for the BAU. He's like depicted in Mindhunter and whatnot. Long story short, I interviewed him a few weeks ago, and I asked him, like, who's the creepiest person you've ever interviewed? Because he's interviewed like Rifkin. I mean, anybody and everybody that was a name back then from the quote unquote golden age. But he was like, I wasn't scared of him. I'm 6'6", 285 pounds. But he's like, we brought a peppermint candy to like a peppermint, like a icicle or whatever, to Toole. And he said the whole time that they were visiting him, like, he was putting it in his mouth and, like, putting it in and out and trying to make them uncomfortable. And he said, like, that was one of the weirdest visits he's ever had. And in regard to, like, Toole, just trying to, like, get a reaction out of them and everything. And I was just curious if you ever visited him, because that's the only person I know that's ever visited him. And I'm like, man, I wish I could see some recorded, interviews like from that, because Toole was just, I feel like him and Lucas were your average, like, quote unquote backwoods hillbilly, serial unalivers. Like back then, that's what they probably thought a serial unaliver was, like just uneducated, dumb, just dirty. But nowadays they're completely different. They're not as dumb, and they're more like, obviously they got to be smarter with DNA technology and cameras and all that good stuff,
Oh, absolutely. We didn't have the technology back then that we do today. Now, there are a few interviews out with Lucas, or I'm sorry, with Toole. I think that there's one on, there's a VHS tape that is from the 80s, and it's called, use the D word, Diploma. And it's a UK tape, and there is an interview with Ottis on that. And then I believe it was a current affair years ago. The reporter by the name of Steve Dunleavy, the British reporter, actually interviewed Toole. It's Stark. And if you can find it, you could probably find it on YouTube if you search deep enough. And it's a great, great interview where he starts talking to Ottis and just starts talking to him about things. And he's like, Ottis, I understand that you're a pyromaniac and you like to set fires. And Toole's responded back to him and goes, yes, I'm a powerful maniac. And, it's just sort of funny because you sit there and Dunleavy saying pyromaniac, and Ottis just keeps responding by, yes, I'm a powerful maniac. I'm a powerful maniac. And then there's a guy that grew up with Ottis, who was a hairdresser in the town. And he would just talk about how Ottis would dress up in dresses. And just he wasn't bothering anybody, but he was just very timid when he was younger. So there is some footage out there, but it's very, very limited.
Right. I think I've seen snippets of interviews with Toole, and he definitely had the creep factor for sure.
Oh, absolutely. It's just those teeth and the wide forehead, and Ottis was a pretty big guy too.
Oh, was he?
Realized, yeah, he was a pretty good sized guy. So until he got the cirrhosis, and while he was in prison, he just started emaciating away.
Right.
But yeah, he at one time was a pretty good sized fellow.
Yeah, that's crazy. I didn't realize he was a big dude at all. Amy, do you have any questions before we talk about juvenile justice?
Do we believe their stories about how many people were claimed to be victims?
Oh, I would say no, because at one point it was between 500 and 700 people, and there's no way that they could have committed that many crimes just based on, even if they were just traveling up and down the road and hitting people with cars. There's still no way that they could have masked that number and not got caught. And I think that that's another thing that sort of led discredit to their case, because they just started, and it was Henry, just taking credit for everything. And I don't know if he was promised something that we've never heard about, or if he wanted just to be the new kid on the block with the highest total. But no, there's no way those numbers are accurate at all.
When I was visiting Philip Jablonski, he gave me vibes of like Toole and Lucas. Of course, I was too young to ever even know the case, or they passed away, I think, before I was even born. But Jablonski was like that I don't give a crap attitude. Like he he was just like dirty and nasty, and he reminded me of their like crimes. Obviously, I think their crimes were more brutal than Jablonski, but they were like two peas in a pod when it came to like just their like lifestyle and the way they spoke and the way they like viewed their victims and stuff. And like Jablonski was a rare breed too of evil, if you want to say evil.
And Lucas, based on some of the letters I've got from him and some of the things he goes into detail, it's almost like you're sitting down at the table with this guy because the descriptions about certain victimology or crimes that were committed were just too dead on. It's almost like you can when you're reading a letter, you can literally picture and visualize everything that's going on.
Right. Yeah. Phil was definitely not shy about talking about his case. And when I was visiting him, he kept dropping racial slurs, and I was to the left and right of me where there were African American inmates, and I'm like, Phil, you need to stop. I'm going to end up getting jumped when I go in the parking lot or something. And he just would be laughing. He'd be like, "Oh, it'll be fine. I know these guys. They're harmless. I'm like, they're on death row." But
Phil was just a different kind of, Phil basically, the history of the case, he didn't he end up marrying one of his pen pals and then got out and murdered her, or, unalived her and her mother?
Yep. And I believe it was his mother, right, that he carved "I love Jesus" into her back.
Yes.
Yeah, he would always talk about that, and he would always send me drawings, unsolicited drawings of "I love Jesus," and he'd laugh and be like, "Heh, I sent you a drawing that related to my case." And he would also send me like paintings of like his snakeskin belt, because I guess he was wearing that at the time of his crimes too, and he was always obsessed with that snakeskin belt. He's like, "When I die, you try to contact the police department and get that." And like, okay, Phil.
Yeah, he, I can go through some of his letters today and I'm like, oh my God, how many of these things are actually accurate? But the only thing, it's almost like reading a Jablonski letter and reading like a David Gore letter. And there's just too much information in there just to discount it because it's just so detailed. And, Phil wasn't that bright either, and Gore wasn't either. But when you start reading this, it's like there's got to be some legitimacy to this because it's just too accurate. And that's the one thing that always disturbed me about Jablonski letters. And Gore was the same way. They would answer, anything that you asked. Whereas some, especially when you're thinking about California, some of the serials out there, they don't want to talk about their case. They never want to talk about their case, but they want to talk about other cases, which I have always found amazing as well. And there are several cases in California that never received the attention that they should have based on the type of victim that they had, the means that they committed, and just the heinousness of the case. Think about that when you think about Kearney's case. Why isn't there more information about that case?
Right. And I feel like there was so many of them at the time, like 70s, 80s, and 90s, that it was probably so hard for the media to keep up with every single one of them. Like, of course, Bittaker and Norris were probably one of the most televised at their time, probably just because the brutality of their case and like the courtroom footage of them going outside and throwing up after listening to the tapes. Like there's just so many, like you said, like there's Kraft, Bittaker, Norris, Billy Mansfield. I mean, Doug Clark, Carol Bundy, the list goes on and on and on. And I'm sure the media was like overwhelmed at the time with covering all these serial, unaliving cases, because there was just so many of them. Like they call California like the honeypot when it comes to serial unalivers, because there's just like take your pick of, who's who,
Yeah, and occasionally I'll go down and I'll pull some of the Bittaker transcripts because I've got pretty much the whole volumes, like 21, 22 volumes of court documents, autopsy reports, and everything related to that case. And it's when I go through it, I'm just like, oh my Lord, this is really sickening. This is really bad. Not only tape, I've got the transcript of the tape as well, and which tape I'm referring to. But
Right. I've read some of it. I can't read much of it because it's
yeah,
I'm squeamish, believe it or not. And like I've read some of it. I'm just like, man, I can't even read this. I can't imagine listening to the tape. I'd probably have nightmares.
that's why I would just take stops and quit reading it, and I have to take those in small doses because I didn't realize how just horrible and evil those two were, and it's clearly within those documents. It's just man, it's amazing. I think though that two people like that couldn't get away with what they did these days. I think technology and law enforcement and everything is just so much better than what it was back then.
Right. You know what's funny is I visited Chester Turner, the Southside Slayer, a month before Bittaker passed away, and I was in a cage with Turner, and right to my right was Bittaker, and they were having a conversation, and they're like talking about nicknames, and Turner's like, "My nickname is Tutu. What's your nickname?" And then Larry looks around real quietly, and he's like, "They call me Pliers." And then he let out like a little laugh, and I was like, the hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I'm just like, "Oh my God."
And let me tell you, that was one of the things that actually in these court documents, there's a section, and they actually pulled, and of course it's copies of it, and I'm thankful to have this, but there's actually a couple of pages where Larry was signing autographs, and there's actually that copies of that he did for other inmates, and it says Pliers Bittaker in his handwriting. And when I seen that, it was just so eerie. I was like, all that stuff was true. Because, sometimes that stuff the things about the case are sensationalized. And that's what I always thought about that until I actually, was skimming through it. And I was like, oh, that wasn't made up. That was true. And that sort of gives you a gut punch when you see something like that.
Yeah, I've seen a few of those signatures out there, and I'm just like, oh my God, that's crazy. Like he just didn't care up until the day he died. Like he had no. Same with Norris too. Norris claims he had some remorse, but I don't think he did. I think he was just trying to get out, and they were two peas in a pod. They were both, serial SAers, and on top of that, serial unalivers at that too. Like they were the two worst people that could have ever met each other and like had fun doing what they did, which is insane to think about.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that Norris had so many people fooled, but I think he was, just as bad as Bittaker. And again, Roy was a big guy too, and very dominant and a lovable puppy, and that Bittaker did everything. But I don't think that's the case because when you think about it, you know what Norris went to prison for to begin with. You know, that's
Right.
that's something that people don't think about. They just hear about Bittaker and Pliers, Bittaker and this and that. But you got to go past that. You got to go back to the original sort of crimes. And if you look at Norris, there are a lot more heinousness with him than what there is with uh, Bittaker. And I'm not trying to make excuses for Bittaker because he was just as bad. But I think that sometimes Norris gets an easy way out, and it shouldn't.
Oh yeah, yeah, 100%. He was. I think he was seen as more like the less dominant, more like submissive one. But I think they both got off on it. Norris gets the easy way out because he unintentionally told on both of them. Like he got tricked by law enforcement, and I think that's why people are like, oh well, he was at least he admitted it, and like he unintentionally admitted it because he thought that Bittaker was turning against him at first.
Oh, absolutely. And it was just who's going to strike first.
Right, right. So when it comes to juvenile justice, what? Well, first of all, like, how did you get into juvenile justice? And second, like, what did you ever handle any type of like, were they just like, like misdemeanor cases or were any like violent cases to where like, because I know you're old enough to where like back then they were sentencing juveniles, to the death penalty, and I'm curious if you've ever had any clients that are former like death row inmates or like lifers, juvenile lifers.
I know because in our state, basically, if they weren't transferred to the adult system, then they would be, sent to a juvenile institution until they're 21 years of age. and then after that they would be released to their parent or the custodian. At the time, Alabama did not have anything where some states, once a juvenile is sentenced for unaliving per se, then they'll go do juvenile time, and then once they turn adult, they'll be transferred to the adult system. And that's not the case here. That's not to say that I haven't run into some bad kids along the way. I have. But I think that the juvenile justice system was in need of reform a long time ago. And it's just like, we always go from sort of very liberal to very just harsh, intense treatment for juveniles. The one thing that people don't realize is that they're kids. And I'm not trying to say that they get a pass, because there are some really bad kids out there, and probably deserve to be in prison by some of the acts that are committed, but I don't think that there was a big emphasis put on juvenile justice at the time, just because it was sort of one of those things where what happened was there was sort of like, I guess, a period where juvenile crime started getting more heinous. And, we weren't just looking at truancy or, status offenses, that were, if they were committed by adults, there wouldn't be any criminal prosecution. And then I think that there's all kinds of other indicators that sort of you have to look at. You have to look at environment. You have to look at nature versus nurturing. You have to look at opportunities. There's just a whole lot of things in regards to the juvenile justice system that people don't think about, because there's a limitation on what you can do with a juvenile unless they get transferred to the adult system. And each state has their own, I guess, sort of requirements. I think if you think about someone that you've interviewed before, Todd Colehep, when you look at him, he was 14 years old and got put in the adult institution at that age. And in a situation like that, I don't think that he was given the proper sentence. And I think that being put in that system that he was so young probably helped create what we see later. Because if you remember about his case and you go back and you remember some of the reports that were done on him, I don't think that they recommended that he go to the adult system. And I think the judge at the time overruled it when they hadn't put him in the adult system. And it's one of those things, shoulda, coulda, woulda. If he hadn't have been put in the adult system, would that have stopped what he became? It's almost like, look at it from this sort of another case, completely opposite. And I know we weren't going to talk about the clown, but think about this. When Gacy was arrested for sodomy on a minor in Anamosa in the late 60s, he received a 10-year sentence. Now, had Gacy completed that entire sentence, do you realize that he would have been out in December of 1978? Had he been released when he was supposed to, there's a possibility that 33 of those murders would have never happened, because he would have actually got out of prison at the time he was arrested for the 33 homicides.
Wow, that's crazy to even think about.
It's scary. You get a 10-year sentence and you only do 18 months. And like I said, you had 33 victims. Do you know how many people that affects? Because we're not just talking about victims. And let's just do 33 that we know of, but we know that there's probably more. And, I would go to the bank on that. And, think about family members. And with 33 people, you could literally be talking about hundreds of people that those crimes affected, if not more, thousands maybe. And then there's a flip side of that, and a lot of times people don't think about that, is you've also got to think about his family, how they were affected. That pretty much shut down their life. They couldn't go anywhere without saying, oh, you must have known about this and what have you. And it's sort of like a two-edged sword. when you start thinking about different crimes and what happens. And I know we got it sort out as off subject, but it's one of those things that, if it, it's like sometimes there needs to be an overhaul of the system, and it's sometimes not that easy.
Right. Speaking about juveniles going to prison and whatnot, what are your thoughts? And I know it's like a case by case basis and like crime and whatnot, but what are your thoughts on juveniles being certified as adults? Say like Michael Carneal, Sean Sellers, who actually got the death penalty and was executed, and like other juvenile offenders. Do you think that some should be certified as adults, or do you think all should be certified as adults based on like capital cases or like first, second degree, so on and so forth?
I think it's based on the situation and the type of case that you're talking about and the type of crime. Generally, when we're talking about transfer to the adult system, we're talking about, unallotted. Uh, some states like Alabama, we have a sort of a system in place where there's got to be certain requirements met before they can be transferred. And, it's up to the juvenile judge. But there's reports that are done. There's, mental health reports, psychological reports. Sometimes there are even forensic evaluations. They look at previous history, what sort of, if they do have history, has there been anything that's been provided to them, any services, those sort of things. And I don't think every state is like that, but I think that if you're going to transfer a kid um, to the adult system, I think we need to make sure that we've pretty much looked at as far as rehabilitation.
Right.
And that's why, people talk about the death penalty. And I'm not opposed to the death penalty, but I think if you're going to sentence someone to death, I think that they need the absolute best sort of defense that they can receive. Give them what they need to make sure, because you're talking about something that ends them. Uh, but I don't think that every state, when it comes to juvenile, have parameters. I think it's probably uh, there's. Well, let me back up. There's probably something in place, but I don't think that it should be automatic. I honestly don't. I don't think that um, like a 14, 15-year-old, oh, we're automatically going to transfer them. I think that there needs to be something in place and examinations conducted and just make sure that we're not making any mistake. Make sure that there's not any mental illness, mental health issues, things like that, because, there's an argument going around that, there's kids today are on so much medicine. How do we know that? How does it affect them? How does it affect their thinking? How does it affect their brain? How does it just does it do any damage to them? And I think that we need to sort of focus on the things that we can sort of uh, make right before we make that ultimate decision. Because if you're talking an adult and you may be talking about a DP case, then that's serious, and that's the end of it.
Right. The thing that bothers me about juveniles being certified as adults, there's a case in Wisconsin. I don't know if you're familiar with Eric Hainstock. Her name is actually Erica Hainstock now, but she was a school. She went to the school with a, how do you say, pew pew, and unalived her principal. And I've been trying to get an interview with her for a few years now. She claims that she was being abused by the principal. But anyhow, I think she was 16, either 15 or 16, and before they turned 18, they went to prison, and they told me the very first day they got to prison, they were SA'd, and that happened quite a bit, and they had to fight to literally protect, their, what's the word, like, at the time, like manhood, because it was multiple people, and that's what bothers me the most is how are you going to put somebody under 18 years old with a bunch of offenders that literally do that to grown men and grown women when a teenager can't even hardly defend themselves. Like, that's what bothers me the most is no matter what they've done, put them with other juvenile offenders or 15 to like 21-year-olds or something like that, not with grown men that are like literally like, oh, fresh meat. That kind of bothers me, regardless of what people think of, what somebody's done, whether it's the most heinous crime or, just a nonviolent crime, whatever.
Yeah, I think that there needs to be they need to be housed with uh, individuals their own age, because they're not used to that environment. They don't know the rules per se, and it's they're sitting ducks, and like you said, it's fresh meat coming into the joint, and that's just something that probably could be avoided. But I think that when you think about it, um, people say, well, they shouldn't have committed the crime. This is what they got, and let's move forward. And I think that that's where we are a lot of times. Um, you know, we with all its faults, we still probably have the best justice system in the entire world. But there's things that need to be changed, and I would hope that there would be more people in favor of that than not in favor of that, because kids, just like I mentioned before, Coleb had no idea what was in store for him. 14 years old, going to Arizona State Prison. He had no idea what was going to happen to him. And who knows? He really don't talk about it a lot. Who knows what happened to him while he was there?
Right, right. Yeah, I've always wondered if anything did happen to him, and it kind of changed the trajectory of his life. Whether he was like assaulted or had to do things for a gang or whatever. Because he was so young. I mean, you're not going to say no to somebody telling you to do something in prison. Otherwise, you're going to be taken advantage of like daily by multiple people. At least that's what a lot of juvenile offenders have told me. Like they had to PC up, or they had to become the quote unquote snitch to get on the good side of the guard, so they would, protect them and whatnot. It's a crazy world in there when it comes to politics, especially when you're a juvenile offender.
Oh, absolutely. And I think it's probably just going to get worse, because I think that, like I said, the pendulum swings. And I think right now there's probably more of a, tough on crime sort of stance in the country. So there's no telling what you'll actually see when it comes to offenders like that, or states trying to change something, But, the Supreme Court has enacted certain laws where, juvenile cannot be executed at a certain age. So that's good that, that's in place. But still, I couldn't imagine being a 14 or 15-year-old being sent away for something that happened and getting a life sentence. That's a long time.
Right, right. Yeah, especially when you're like 13, 14, 15 at the time. I mean, I know that, you have to do your time, and you have to be, punished for what you've done. I mean, certainly like look at Ed Kemper. Like, if he would have been locked up for life, there would have been a lot of lives saved, kind of like you said with Gacy. But he manipulated the system and manipulated his therapist and psychiatrists and all that, and got out and unalived, like 11, 12, 13 people after his grandparents.
Yeah, he was actually helping whenever he was, in the juvenile facility. He was actually helping them administer the test for other individuals. He had them all fooled,
Yeah.
So they were letting him grade. He was, whenever he had to go to his first visit, after he was out of the juvenile institution, sort of started seeing an adult probation officer. He went to go check in, and he had, his victims, one of the, body parts in the trunk, body parts in the trunk on the day that he had to go check in. So, he had everybody fooled, and did it for years.
Right. Yeah, Kemper's definitely a phenomenon when it comes to cases like his. And I mean, he was probably just as smart, if not smarter, than Bittaker, because he has like a genius IQ, doesn't he?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And yeah, Bittaker was up there. John was up there pretty high. And you still can't forget the number one. When it's all said and done, I still think that Bundy is, patient zero, because we could have learned more about Bundy had they taken the time to study. And I understand that he had to pay for his crimes, but I think that, from what I understand, before that last night, he offered to provide more information for other, burial sites and what have you. And they was like, no, there's not going to be any stay. We're going to go ahead and go forward. And I just, always wondered, and I've always thought about, what could we have learned had they spent the time and put the right people in and just learned about Ted. And, there's something to be said about, Ted, because I think, during the time that he was in Stark, I think Bob Keppel flew down from Washington State to actually meet with Ted because they had met each other in Washington State. And Mr. Keppel went down and sort of got some input from Ted about doing a profile on Green River. So, he knew what he was talking about, because I think that ultimately some of the stuff that he told Mr. Keppel helped them as far as eventually track down Ridgway.
Right. I've always been curious if he did that out of the goodness of his heart, or if he was just jealous and wanted to help catch him to be in the spotlight again. I've always wondered what his intentions were there.
I always thought that it was going to help him on that back end. That if he helped them, that I think that he thought that he may have had the opportunity for a stay. That's what I think. Because at that time, I think that Ridgway had already bypassed Bundy. Well, we never know. I've heard that Bundy was in the hundreds, so he wouldn't have bypassed him there. But he had already bypassed Gacy, and Gacy location.
Right. Something funny about Bundy. Well, not funny, but ironic. But Bundy was helping the FBI or whatever. I did an interview with Dr. Ann Burgess, and before Kohberger was arrested, right? Apparently Kemper was interested in the case and wanted some details. Like he wanted details, but he didn't want biased details. So I guess he was been talking to some journalists for quite some time, and him and Kemper, and I guess Kemper was given his thoughts on the Idaho 4 case, which I thought was super fascinating. And I only learned that when I fascinated, and not many people even know that. I only learned that when I did my interview with Dr. Burgess, and I was like, wow, that's crazy. Like Kemper is still like actively trying to help law enforcement, like, solve cases. Maybe it's like his conscience or, whatever. Like I just find that fascinating that Kemper even cares still to this day to involve himself with that, whether it's ego or just fascination, whatever.
Oh, absolutely. I found that very interesting in a situation like that, because it still shows that he's sort of in tune with what's going on. And it may be just the logistics of the case. What are they doing now as opposed to what he did? Because, he's probably studied every individual that is classified just like him. Supposedly, I think in 1985 at Quantico, there was actually a live feed with Kemper and Gacy, where they were talking to agents. But, I think that's probably, from what I understand, the property of the FBI, and we'll never see that tape, or it's never been released. The property of the FBI, and we'll never see that tape, or it's never been released.
Right. Yeah, it's probably classified. That would be amazing to see if that is true. That would definitely break records when it came to like views, and that could be a Netflix in itself.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, Jules. That is right. Yeah, I did. That's what Dr. Ann Burgess told me when I did my interview with her like a year ago or 6 months ago. I don't know, something like that. It was before Kohberger was arrested, before they even knew that he was a suspect in the unalivings. So to round us out today, can we talk about your serial homicide class and what that's all about? I know in the past you and I have done, like live phone calls with your class, and the most probably notable person was Otto Smith that your class probably thought was a freaking hoot and just crazy, but can you talk about your serial homicide class and like what that's all about and what the curriculum is, like based on and whatnot?
Sure. I've been teaching the class for about 20 years now. I actually teach a part 1, part 2. The part 1 is sort of the American version of SKs. And then part 2, we go across the pond. and talk about some of those individuals. Really, it's one of those upper level classes. It's a 400 level class, so it's geared towards upperclassmen. But it's just sort of I guess, if you will, uh, just a sort of formulation of case studies about various SKs, like I said, from an American standpoint and then from a UK standpoint. And we go into just pretty much A to Z. We go into childhood, we go into sort of the methodology, we go into MO, we go into uh, uh, victimology, we go into the arrest process, what happens, how they were caught, and then, we sort of close out with what is the end result. So generally, what I do now is it's a pretty popular class. So I teach one class back in the traditional classrooms, and I'll be going back in fall, and then usually in the spring I do online. And I usually have, whether it's when it's online, I usually have 85 to 90 students. And now that I'm going back in the classroom, they've raised my population to, I think, 75. So the class is full. It's always a big class. And I actually prefer the traditional classroom setting because that allows the students to ask questions and we can sort of have discussions about the cases. And, something that most of my students, I even talk about safety, and I talk about, being a student walking on campus. And it sort of is a good sort of opportunity for me to discuss, one of our local guys, Jack Trawick. Jack Trawick used to cruise around UAB campus looking for girls, and I'm sitting there talking to him. I was like, why don't you look out that window? Because I can probably promise you that Jack used to drive up and down that road right there on University. And it sort of puts him in the context. And, at the end of the year, I always get comments and emails from students saying, thank you so much, because I didn't realize that, uh, that you always need to be aware of your surroundings, a safety standpoint. And I try to, you know, present them whenever I start off every semester. I say, hey, this is an adult class. So if there are words that offend you, this probably isn't the class for you. And, I've got just this past semester, a guy I work with, actually, it was sort of a treat for the students and they really enjoyed it. But I had a friend of mine, his wife, who was his girlfriend when they were younger. They've been, high school sweethearts. And my buddy's brother lived in Gate City, and Cleophas Prince used to stay at their house all the time.
Oh, wow.
And, his brother was talking about some of the things that Cleophas did prior to getting arrested and what he did in Birmingham, and just him being over at their house all the time. And that was sort of a situation it was a great situation because, it was the first time that I had someone who wasn't a family member, just a friend of a serial, talk about what they saw as teenagers from this individual. And it's sort of like, oh man, it's like I always say, they hide in plain sight. And it's one of those things that people don't realize. And like I said, I focus a lot on safety and education. And I tell a lot of my students, I was like, you really never know what your surroundings could be or what could happen. You've always got to be aware. And then I go into talking about, at some point in your life, you may have come in contact with a serial and not even know it. And I said, your likelihood of actually getting to meet or talk with a serial is probably, you got a better chance of doing that than meeting your favorite celebrity. Because as you know, serials are so easy accessible these days than what they had been in the past. But yeah, it's. I think it's a good class. My population proves that. My class generally ends up being about 80 to 90% female, 10% male, and it's just sort of like one of those taboo subjects that sort of brings students, gives them a little bit of ease and gets them to talk about um, some of the things that they've seen on TV, and we talk about some of the things that are false. And I'm able to put some of the myths about serials to rest for them.
Hmm. Have you ever had any students that were like kind of weird, like asking you questions that you thought were like, oh, this isn't right, like this guy seems a little off?
Yeah, absolutely, and it wasn't a guy; it was a gal, young lady. We were covering something on um, Treywick, and you're familiar with the case, Andrew, and you
Right.
know that how he had a person on the outside that I think that they were sending back messages about how to do something to somebody and get away with it. Well, we had talked about that, and this student was kept raising her hand in class, and she kept on, she kept on, and she kept on, and I finally got to her, and just out of the blue, she's like, "How do you and get away with it? How can you do something to somebody and get away with it?" And I just kind of stopped and I said, "That's not an appropriate question for this class." And I had to, after that, I had to contact the chair, and there were certain things put in place that I had to start doing. And the thing about that is, after she had asked that question over the course of the semester, the people that were sitting by her gradually started shifting away from her. And towards the end of the semester, she was sitting all by herself, almost like on an island, because everyone was, they didn't know what to think, and I think they were scared of her.
Hmm. That's crazy. I was gonna say if you ever want to do the phone calls again with any offenders, it's been a while since we've done it, and I have so many new ones that you can talk to. I actually have a good friend of Otto Smith's. Actually, ironically enough, he's a serial unaliver too. He had two victims at the age of 15 and two others at the age of like 22, 23, something like that. And we're working on a few things right now. He wants to like give back to his victims. So we're working on like book projects and launching a new podcast soon and so many other different things. But yeah, if you want to do that in the future, I'm totally still down to do that with you and your students.
I appreciate that. And I absolutely want to do it this semester coming up. I know that they also got a kick out of Wild Bill, just because he's so hilarious, talking about religion one minute and then talking about graphic sex the next. But someone else that they really enjoyed was oh uh, the gal from Oregon,
Oh, Susan Monica.
Susan. Yes, they really enjoyed that. So I don't know if you're still in touch with her, but that was like mind blowing to some of them. I got emails for days after that. But I think that
That's
it
awesome.
also sort of lets students see from a different angle, because you sort of have to, when you're teaching a class like this, you sort of got to go through and sort of break down some of the things, the myths. You sort of got to go through and sort of break down some of the things, the myths that they thought they knew about. And some of this stuff is just television. You need to realize that. And there's a difference between television and real life. And I think that whenever you get an actual, when they have the opportunity to actually ask questions to someone who's done stuff like that, I think it just sort of blows their mind. It's like, oh, this is very interesting. So yeah, I'll definitely take you up on that again. I really appreciate you offering.
Yeah, most definitely, most definitely. And funny you mentioned Susan Monica because she quit talking to me like a year and a half ago after she would always blow up my phone and just want to talk about like politics and this and that. I'm like, Susan, I have a job. I talked to a lot of other prisoners, and she kind of like was rude to me and hung up on me. And I'm like, whatever. Like I don't take it personal with these people. But I'm gonna reach out to her and see if I can visit her because I have a friend that lives like 10 minutes away from the prison, and I would be staying with him. I'm trying to get him to visit her with me too. But I really want to visit her because her case is insane. Like
Oh,
based
absolutely.
like
It's
the
one of
female
those,
pic.
even with that one, there's still so many unanswered questions, because, whenever we were talking to her and the students were asking questions and you and I were asking questions, she was still sort of cagey about certain things. And that's the things that sort of like, there's some more diving that needs to be done to see if she's going to answer those questions.
Right, right. Yeah, she's definitely an interesting individual for sure. She's yeah, interesting to say the least.
Yes, absolutely.
But um, Amy, do you have any parting words or questions before we let James go?
So, have any thoughts on Kenneth Bianchi or Wayne Williams?
Oh man, you threw some curveballs to me.
I know them both very well.
Okay. Uh, I actually just got a letter from Wayne about a month and a half ago, and honestly, that's one of those cases that I've always had doubts about. Um, I had doubts about it years ago, when I first knew about the case, and then when I guess Payne Lindsay did the Wayne Williams, podcast,
Yeah,
because there was some more pieces to it that just sort of brought questions. And I told Wayne, in my letter, um, I really think that there's some significant issues about your case, especially the carpet fiber evidence, because there was what 6,000 homes in the Atlanta area at the time that had the same carpet.
I've got
Uh
something that'll blow your mind.
oh, lay it on me.
What if I told you that I have emails that Larry Patterson from the GBI lab and representatives from both DuPont and Wellman were both exchanging in 2002 to 2004, discussing the source of the fiber, and nobody could figure out where the fiber came from.
Oh my goodness, that's very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Oh see, that just lends more credibility. And I talked to someone in Savannah a year or two ago, and she was no, it's Wayne. Absolutely unequivocally. And I was like, I'm sorry, no disrespect, but I just don't see it. There's just too much doubt for me.
Mm-hmm.
And Atlanta's not that far from my house, and I've been over there, and I understand that Wayne was involved with some things, but I just I can't buy it. And my argument has always been, and the thing about it is there's empirical evidence to sort of back this up. And I was like, please, if he was the boogeyman and he was arrested and we know that we got the right guy, then why were there still just as many African American kids
Mm-hmm.
being killed after he was arrested?
Absolutely.
And people say, no, that's not the case. And I was like, there's evidence to prove that there were. And they
Right.
just sort of discount that. And I was like, I guess I'm the only dummy here. I guess
But
I
you're
don't know
not.
numbers. I guess but maybe I'm just so gullible. And that's the one thing that's always bothered me about that case. And, I think that I hope that he hasn't given up.
No,
But
he's
that
got an
maybe,
attorney.
I just think that there's so much that if you could prove to me that there weren't more kids being killed after that, then okay, maybe. But I know that that's not the case.
That's
And
definitely not the case.
and
Um, there were a lot of things. Well, I mean, also people don't take into consideration either the whole, like, why did the MO keep changing if he was the one who was doing this?
yes,
That doesn't make any sense either. Like, that's not typically what happens.
and
And then on top
that's
of that, how do you make Alfred Evans into one of the pattern cases, but you don't make Edward Hope Smith when they were both went missing around the same time and found in the same place?
yeah, absolutely. I think that right there, there's so much more to that case, and I think that that's why I was hoping that had there been a third season to Mindhunter, because they were fixing to start, I think, on the Williams case.
Yeah.
I was really wondering how they were going to put that twist on it. But yeah, I have a lot of doubts about his case as far as the guilty factor when it comes to Williams.
Anthony Carter, I think it was a victim of 11, I believe, the 9-year old.
Hmm.
Um, his family firmly believes that it was one of their family members. And if you go back and watch, I think it was the Discovery Channel special, it was like a 3-part special. There was a cousin that was on there that was talking about how him and Anthony Carter were playing hide and seek. and he was just oddly specific about some of the things that he said. And he was like, we played hide and seek, and there were 40 of us, and then afterwards I only counted 39, and Tony was missing. And so it's like, well, what kids stop to count everybody who's
Right.
still there? Like, kids come and go from games like that all the time. And so that didn't make any sense whatsoever. But then what was even more interesting was the fact that I looked at Tony's autopsy report. I got I was fortunate enough to work with Wayne closely enough to be able to get the bulk of the files.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked at Tony's autopsy report, and the very first page, said that he went missing on, we'll say, July 5th. That he was unalived on July 6th. He was found on July 7th. They did the autopsy on July 8th, and I think that is the accurate timeline. But then the inside narrative was something that was quite interesting, because that narrative said that there was putrefaction, gaseous distension, but more than that, it said that there was a massive maggot infestation in the bronchioles. And the life cycle of a fly is not like 2 days.
No, no.
So that right there told you that it was longer. So I contacted the body farm out in North Carolina, and they agreed to look at the records. And they were like, "No, this is what." It also had extensive skin slippage, um, and those were the words that were used: massive and extensive. And anyhow, so what happened was they came back and they say that was more like 3 to 4 weeks worth of decomp. And I was like, okay, and that just kind of pulled some things together. Well, so in 2021, I helped get a headstone for Tony, and we did a memorial. And I went down when the news was down there interviewing the family and stuff like that, and I recorded every single time that he was talking to the news, the cousin in question. And on one of those interviews, he said, "We didn't know where he was until he showed up a month later dead." And I was like, "Are you kidding me?"
Mm.
He just admitted that his little 2 day story that he's been telling everybody is a
Yeah,
lie. And I
yeah,
was like, "Oh my God." Um, I talked to Sydney Dorsey, but nobody takes Sydney Dorsey as credible, because he himself has found himself in prison.
yeah, yeah. That's yeah. It's there's just so much to that case that it's I guess the Gacy case. There doesn't go a day go by that I don't think about it, just because I knew John, and was able to talk with him and visit him. But the Williams case is another one of those cases up there for me that it's just I don't have all the answers. And it literally sometimes it bothers me because there's so much that we don't know about that case. Just like what you said, that this is just a short little conversation we're having. Can you imagine all the other stuff that you probably know that other people don't know, and that
Oh
what
yeah.
Wayne's been trying to say for all these years?
I've
So
had I have
that's another one that just
tons of recorded phone calls with Wayne, that he's told me to record. And I'm not doing it because I'm creepy.
right, right.
Um, but he's like, "Here, take this down." And I have tons of writings from him, and then I have those records. I have the GBI slipped up and gave me those emails when I did a request through using his permission to get the
Mhm.
records. And it's been interesting. But you're the going back to your original thing about the probability. The probability is absolutely an issue, especially because they didn't take into consideration all of the patent poachers.
Well, I didn't even think about that. You're exactly right. That puts another iron in the fire right there.
Yeah. And those emails, if you read the emails, they're really interesting, because they even talk about that. They talk about, they asked DuPont, like, "Hey, um, how many people were, infringing on your patent? And, how many did you go after?" That type of thing. And so it was interesting, because But again, if you got your man, why are you having this conversation in 2002 to 2004? And why is
Absolutely.
Wellman, who testified that it was their fiber, not, why do they not know?
Exactly. And like you said, all the patents, poachers think about that because, you can't go more than what, 10 or 15 miles in Georgia without seeing a carpet company.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
that's, that used to be the thing, Georgia carpet, Georgia carpet. So,
Hmm.
yep. I'm always just trying to find out more about that case because I think it's so interesting and I think
Well,
that
I
they
have
got it
his
wrong.
records if you ever want to see them.
Oh, I would love to read those things just because it's one of my ones that I'm just so captivated about. And I think, I don't think that uh, now, after all these years, I don't think that, I'm one of the only ones that don't think that way, because of
No,
people are starting to
absolutely.
put two and two together. Um,
Um,
Go
People
ahead.
kind
I'm
of
sorry.
shifted to, I've seen people shift away from, yeah, I think he did it, to, okay, I think he might know something. And I'm like, knowing something and doing something are two totally different things, you know, and,
Absolutely.
and that's just one of those things that's an absolute truth. Um, but anyhow, I think his case it's interesting. And if you ever even want to talk to him on the phone, let me know. I can get him on the phone for you.
Okay. I may take you up on that because, like I said, I've been trying to, I've got some of the books here on my bookcase, but is there a book that you would recommend that would be more accurate in relation to on Wayne's behalf or
No.
anything out there? I didn't think there was. I just wanted to
No,
ask.
that's the problem. I would suggest reading the files and just letting it all speak, to you. Like the GBI files for Patrick Rogers are another interesting, like, I don't know. I don't know if they're intentionally trying to like um, create a narrative or not, but like on their, so they have their autopsy and they have their cover sheet, and then they have 4 pages of narrative attached to it, and then it's stamped with a signature and a date. Okay. Well, the problem is that when I went to Cobb County, because he's the only Cobb County case, when I went to Cobb County and I asked for the same records, I get back 6 pages of narrative, not four. So they left out 2 pages, and those 2 pages are actually really crucial,
Hmm.
because when you read those 2 pages say things like Patrick was known to be a roamer. Patrick was, but basically it said because he's young, black, and unalived, we should let the, task force know. And it's like, that's ridiculous.
Yeah, and
But I
that's
will say
that's.
this, in all of the years that I have been, working with Wayne, um, I can say that I do have theories about who was behind some of it.
Hmm.
Um, and I will just leave you to ponder this. I think some of them were absolutely done by paramedics.
That's interesting.
What better
Now I
crime
know I've got to
scene?
read the files. Now I know I've got to read them. Yeah, there's just so much about that case that it leaves you hanging.
It
And I guess
does.
because it's so close to me, that's another thing. I'm just like literally I could jump in the car and be there, in an hour and 40 minutes,
Yeah.
uh, over there, in the neighborhood that he lived in. So yeah, it's
Hey, do you
just
know Edward Blackwelder?
I do not.
So he's over in Alabama, and he was a criminologist who he was a professor at Jackson State,
Okay.
and he actually worked on Wayne's case during the time. I was going to say, if you ever need anybody fascinating to talk to, now he absolutely believes that Wayne is guilty of a few,
Uh huh.
but he firmly stands on his position that Wayne did not get a fair trial and that Wayne should be out.
Yeah, I think that's the way a lot of us feel,
He's
especially
the
as
one
much
who
money.
had Wayne's car for so long.
Yeah, I think there's another guy that has his car now.
Yeah, Seth.
Seth, yeah, Seth has it.
Yeah,
Um,
I
so
know Seth really well too.
um, that guy, I seen that guy who you're talking about on like one of these discovery things when they were doing a
Oh,
thing because I
yes,
remember him.
absolutely.
I think he was friends with Wayne's parents or something like that.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
okay. I know who you're talking about. I just don't know him personally, but yeah, I remember seeing that. So it's a small world, let me tell you. Um, you asked me about Kenny. Kenny's a totally different story for me. Different story for me. Uh, I don't have as much faith in Kenny as Kenny probably has in himself, or you know, some of his beliefs. But I just think that there's a lot more to that um, that than we know. But I think Kenny's probably where he deserves where he's at. That's just my 2 cents.
Interesting.
Uh, he's uh, he's an interesting character. Um,
He's a very interesting guy.
yeah, I
He's
think that he,
very polite.
yeah.
He is very kind. It was not at all what I expected when I first met him.
That's interesting because he used to be very hateful and very just, you know, sort of like rambunctious and would I know people that purchased art from him and then he would sell it to them and then he would get mad at them and say, you never paid me. I never did this. And they had proof, you
Oh
know,
Lord.
handwriting and envelopes and stuff like that. So, you know,
He's never done anything like that with me. I was part of I was part of his his legal team as well.
so you've probably seen a different side then.
I have,
And
absolutely.
you know, and that's the way that you learn stuff about people as far as finding out stuff that you know um, that things may not be the way that you see them or perceive them to be. So
Yeah.
I can
I,
completely understand that.
I don't know. I never dealt with the California case.
Hmm.
But I absolutely did work on the Bellingham stuff. And I found some very interesting things in his Bellingham files that I think are, I don't know, they pose too many questions for me on his guilt for those.
Do you think that they're attached to another SK in that area?
No, I think they were attached to a love triangle in that area.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so it, reason being is because so like one of the things that was in the records was a statement. It was a supplemental statement from police talking about spotting the girls at a party that they had busted up about 2 hours after they were supposedly unalived. Outside of that, there's two other things that I find very interesting. I love when crime and religion intersect too. It's kind of like my favorite things coming together. But there was a guy named Robert Brown. Have you ever heard about him?
I haven't. No.
Okay, so Robert Brown was this guy. So his daughter was working at I can't even remember the name of the store Ken worked at, but um, so Ken was Jules. That's a loaded question. I'm going to be filming on Ken soon, so um, anyhow, so the Robert Brown's daughter worked there, and there's this document that's in the police files. It is not marked as not official or anything else. It is literally embedded in this police file, and it is a Robert Brown alleges that he had with a dispatcher, and it talks about how he's calling it in, saying that he told um, and saw her in a coffin, and that he warned her a week before. Anyhow, what's interesting about him outside of this whole transcript that's in there looking quite official, um, there is a few other times that they are talking to him, and one of them is where Captain Schenk is telling. telling Robert Brown, if you're having any more visions, you need to come to me for interpretation. And I was like, why would he come to you for interpretation? And I was like, ooh, I wonder, because Robert Brown is FLDS. And I was like, I wonder if that was like, if maybe he was like an elder or something like that. But anyhow, fast forward though, a year, I think it was a year after Ken had been arrested, or might have been after he was convicted. Well, both of those are still true no matter what. But there's a report of having a conversation with Robert Brown where they're asking him to come in and give a lie detector test. Why are you having somebody come in and give a lie detector test if you have your person?
Right.
Like, why would you do that? That doesn't make any sense. But there was a relationship. I think it was Diane. I'd have to go back and look at all my notes, but she was in a relationship with a guy named Steve, and she also was in. She was living with a guy named Bill, and that night there are records of Steve, who was a security guard at the college, who went to his friend who was a cop saying that the girls were missing and he needed a radio and a gun. Oh, pew pew, sorry. Um, and I'm like, that's so weird. Why would you go and ask for that? But this was allegedly around the time that this whole, love triangle was coming out. But that aside, there is a document that's inside of the reports, and this document is the prosecutor's post-conviction sentencing statement, and it goes through and it details what they say happened in this particular event. And it talks about, I mean, like, you've got to also think about the fact that this was a huge house, right? And in this huge house, they go through and they vacuum it afterwards, and they find nothing. But they come back over a week later, and all of a sudden, on one single step, they find a hair that is attributed to each one of them, all three of them, on stairs that they had already vacuumed and they had already been walking up and down. And that doesn't make any sense to me. But his post conviction sentencing statement, this was interesting because it laid out the path that was allegedly taken. And this path, I'm sure you know the Locard principle, right?
I do not, or
The
maybe it's
Locard
what's it?
principle, where it says that that tooth same principle with Wayne. Like, why was something of Wayne allegedly on these 29 victims, but there's nothing of these 29 victims on anything of Wayne's?
Right. Gotcha. Yes.
Okay. Same principle here. So what they did was they described how this happened. So it was like Ken walked in the house, he walked down the stairs, he walked down, and he placed the weapon in a hidden spot. He allegedly leaves. So he's walking back up the stairs, through the house, outside, goes, meets the girls. They all come in. They're walking through, down the stairs, through the house where he's showing them around, and then allegedly brings them back into this room where all of this starts taking place. So you have clothing that's being taken off. You have taking place. So you have clothing that's being taken off. You have these assaults that are happening in beds and on floors and stuff like that, and yet there was nothing of any of them found in those areas.
It
And
has a
I have a problem with that,
yeah, it
because
has a
they
consequence.
they they detailed 49 different times when that transference should have happened.
See, there's always more that we don't know.
I'm
Now
telling you,
now
it
the
is
rest of the story.
weird.
Now the rest of the story. That's what Paul Harvey used to say. Now the rest of the story.
So in 2021, I met with Peacock before they were doing theirs. I think it's like I don't remember what they called it, but they, I met with them, and the producer told me, she said, she showed me their research, and the the LAPD was boasting a 95% solve rate for homicides. Get out of
95%.
here.
So
Okay.
that's yeah, tooting your horn.
Get out of here. You know that's fake, or you know that you are putting away people that are not guilty. You're throwing in some patsies here and there, but none. And that's probably how the Golden State ended up getting away for so long. Um, but that poses a problem. There also was an article that was in the LA Times that was written by this guy named Bill, and I can't remember his last name, but it was detailing the information inside of a memo that was leaked from two junior DAs to the main DA, explaining why Ken's testimony was problematic, and it was going to end up making it so Angelo was going to end up getting off. They're like it doesn't match.
Now that is very interesting right there.
I have all of that too.
That's amazing stuff, because that's the stuff that we don't hear about. That's like what I was mentioning earlier about going through that Bittaker stuff and seeing stuff that you're like, oh, that's interesting. Why wasn't this brought
Yes.
up? How come this is never mentioned? And there's so
But
much stuff that's hidden within those sort of documents
mhm,
that's to just sort of like, bypassed or overlooked intentionally most of the times, especially during court
100%.
proceedings. Yeah.
Listen, we live in the age of FOIA, and there are so many
Yeah.
people who will like watch a TikTok and they'll be like, "Oh, this must be true because they said it," and it's like half the time people don't even realize like what it is that they're reading, and it kills me because I'm sitting there like, guys, like pause and break down what it is that you're reading before you just start jumping to conclusions.
Yeah. And FOIA's come a long way, because like whenever, right after John was executed, I was still trying to get confession statements, and I filled out all the proper paperwork, and literally uh, got back like 12 pages when I knew there should have been like 70 hiding stuff. And I guess it's who all you know is what it ended up, because shortly after that, about 10 years later, the full confession statements released, the same thing that I asked for, and I went through the proper channels. So it is what it is.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I mean, in all honesty, I think that Gacy is a really interesting one anyhow, because of the simple fact that, you had Bob Motto's tapes that got put out, right? And then you have what the heck was the lady's name? What's her name? Andrew.
I'm blanking on her name. I know who you're talking about though.
Catherine, I don't know.
Oh, Karen
Um,
Kuzma, his sister.
no, the attorney.
Karen Conti,
Oh,
right?
Karen Conti.
Oh, Conti, yes. So you have hers that also get put out, and it's like you see two different sides of Gacy in those, and it's interesting because in those little moments, like here and there, where you would see like him say deny that he was guilty of anything, and like you listen to the Mata tapes, and it's like dude is sitting here like detailing this stuff down to a T. But then on top of that, you've got people like, say, David Berkowitz. And David Berkowitz was, Jack Jones was a reporter. I don't know if you know who he is, but Jack was a reporter who is very close to David. And anyhow, I'm sitting there, I'm watching the Sons of Sam documentary, and after I got off the phone, this is what I love about what I do, because I was able to pick up the phone and call him and go, "All right, Jack, I just finished this documentary. Like, tell me what's up." And so he goes, "Oh, no, that's a lie." He said, because all he did was change with, and he said, "I've got like 20 hours of recorded interviews with him where he's talking very openly about what it is that he did." So I think
John.
that you have that kind of psychosis that's going on
Yeah.
in there, with these guys that are wanting to, um, portray something that they're not.
Oh yeah. 'Cause, how can you give your initial confession and you tell about everything, down to specifics of what the kid was wearing, and then, once you go to prison, you sort of forget all that.
Hmm.
Like you didn't say that, And that happens a lot, and that's specifically with John. During uh, my 11, 12 visits with him during the course of it, he only talked about uh, two homicides, and we know that there's a whole lot more than that.
Oh
So
yeah. How they get under your
yeah,
porch in your house, buddy.
house,
There was
yeah,
only
get all the way.
two. Get out of here. That's the kind of stuff that and Andrew, you mentioned Joel Rifkin. Joel Rifkin loves me.
Really? That's funny. He won't talk
Yes.
to me.
He loves me. I don't know what I did, but I don't know.
His
He's an interesting character.
He is actually, especially when you start going deep into the case files and just about the planning and everything. And when he's still living with his mother at the time, uh, there was just a whole lot of weirdness about that. That a lot of people don't know about that case just because he
Hmm.
talked about it.
Well, that's because they stick to the big ones, the big names, the
Yeah,
Bundys, the Dahmers, the Gacy's, the Berkowitz.
and that's what I said. I said, if they would start focusing on smaller cases, you would probably find out a lot more information. I've got a letter from David Gore, uh, and he was a teen kill with his cousin, and he specifically talks to me about how he and Bundy were friends while they were on the road together, and how they wished that they had teamed up on the outside, knew each other, and teamed up on the outside. Because they were like, could you imagine what we could have done on the outside, me and you together?
Yeah,
And I
that
was
would have been
like,
carnage all around.
oh,
That
absolutely.
was scary to think about.
That is wild. Well, all I know is that, I mean, when you've got those main cases, people will consume it, and it doesn't matter how regurgitated the material is. If it's about Bundy, if it's about Gacy, if it's about one of those, they will eat it up.
Oh, absolutely. Because,
They'll act like it's new material they've never seen before.
I
And
know
it's
you're
like,
talking about, it's like, most of those cases are 50 plus years old now, too. And they're still,
mm-hmm.
being Netflixed out and everything else.
Oh yeah. Do you know Harry De La Roche?
Mary De La Roche. That name is so familiar.
It was from New Jersey, and he went in at 18 for allegedly unaliving his two brothers and his parents.
Okay. In Jersey?
Jersey, yeah.
No. I have
He just
seen
got
that.
paroled like a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago. But anyhow, I got close to him too. And, he was talking about how, well, they won't let me out because I won't, admit that I did all four. I say I only did the one. He claims that he came home and that the brother had done the other ones. And so he unalived the brother. And I'm just
Interesting.
like, but they don't go and I mean, I was telling him, I was like, so why don't you go and see about like getting a documentary done?
Yeah, because there's so many interesting cases like that that quit recycling all the ones that we know everything about. You know,
Yes,
that's what
please.
so that's what annoys me about it is it just seems like there's something they'll sort of put a tagline out and make you think that there's something that's just unbelievably found, and then once you start watching the doc, you're like, what's new? You basically tricked us into watching this, and there's nothing new about the case, and that's typical, especially when you think about the big ones.
Yeah.
I think what Netflix is working on the one about Gacy. They just did the Dahmer one. They'll continually just recycle them because it sells. That's the thing about it.
Absolutely. And again, I mean, you can't get around that.
No, you can't.
I mean, I see all the love for like Koberger and stuff right now in that case. Not necessarily for Koberger, but for the case itself. But it's like I feel like it's just going to be just another case that's still going to be overshadowed. It's going to have, a documentary here and there, and it's going to have books here and there, but nothing is ever going to compare to those big ones.
No, and that's. that's you know that's the truth when you go to the bookstore and see the same people, the same books. Like how many books have to be written about Charles Manson?
Hmm. Or the mafia.
Yeah, there's just there's like a unlimited number every time you go, or you'll see like you could go to Barnes and Noble Books a Million, like you could go to Barnes and Noble Books a Million down to the true crime section, and you're going to see at least five books with Charlie's face on it, or five books with Dahmer's face on it. It's just the way
Hmm.
it is. It still sells, and I guess that's why we still consume it.
Yeah. By the way, Andrew,
Yes.
this made me think about the fact that 2 weeks ago a new civil RICO case was filed. Guess who it
Uh,
was against?
did he?
Fat Joe and Pete.
Oh, that. I've been seeing Fat Joe. Like a guy claims he like essayed him or something like that, and he's suing him for
Oh
20
yeah,
million.
I read the documents last night. Oh my God.
Yeah, that's insane. Yeah, I also read something that somebody claims that Fat Joe tried to set up 50 Cent multiple times and was like tracking his location and stuff. Like all this crazy stuff's coming out about Fat Joe.
Yeah, and Pete. And Pete.
Yeah, that's crazy. I wonder if anything will come from this. Like I'm curious to see because all these rappers are going down. Melly, Tay K, King Von was unalive. Like all these rappers are going to prison. Lil Durk, it's crazy.
It's just crazy. I want to go back. I kind of want to go back and listen to my interviews with Pete now because I do have a lot of his tales of violence captured in those interviews.
That's crazy.
James, just FYI, I was a ghostwriter.
That's the way to do it these days.
Yeah, my name was not going on that. Although he kept saying, we're gonna put your name on there too, and I'm like, I don't want my name
Yeah.
on there. Y'all
There
just pay me to do my job, and we'll call it a day.
you go.
All right. Well, thank you again, James. I appreciate it. It's always a pleasure speaking with you. I hope one of these days we can actually connect in person. I was hoping you were going to CrimeCon, but I know you're doing something around the same time that CrimeCon's going on, and I wish I could go to that, but I'm going to CrimeCon this year.
What do you have going on? Because I'm closer to you.
Well, there was. I actually don't know if it's going to happen, but there was going to be a sort of like another Gacy Pogo Palooza 3 in Savannah, but I think it's going to be
That's in
rescheduled.
There's something in September. Is that it?
No, this was going to be in July, and then it's not going to happen. But I don't know what's happening in September.
Oh, somebody told me you were going, but maybe they were just
I,
confused.
I
There's a lot
was,
of
but
collectors and
I
stuff that
was,
are
but I
meeting
think
up
it's going
in.
to be rescheduled
Oh, I
because
got you. I got you.
everything couldn't get put together the way it needed to be, as far as
Uh,
other people speaking.
okay, okay. Well, maybe I can attend that then in the near future since it won't be around the same time CrimeCon is. That'd be awesome.
No, I think it's
Wait, does
going to
this
probably.
mean that since I'm going to be filming on Ken, I get to now do speaking tours about him? Just
I don't see
kidding.
why
I don't want to
not.
be that associated.
Well,
And Jules, to
sometimes,
answer your question, I actually am on the side of I don't think Ken needs to be there. Ken is an old man now. He
yeah.
is 72 years old. He's also not Ken anymore. Um, he's Anthony D'Amato.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, he's
Yeah.
changed it twice. He was Nicholas Fontana in between. Um, but yes, he is Anthony D'Amato. He's been that for like, I don't know, like 20 years, but maybe even longer. But he never officially changed it. But I think it's changed in the system now, isn't it, Andrew?
Yeah, it's officially changed because that news article somebody tagged me in. One of my sister's friends was like, "Did you know he was up for parole?" But I'm like, "Yeah," and they're like, "Did you know he changed his name?" I'm like, yes, a few years ago actually. So yeah,
He's I don't think he's a threat to society. I think he's He's an old man, and I don't know.
He's like Bruce Davis. They need to go ahead and let him out of the joint.
Yep. Yeah, I've spoke to Bruce a
Yeah,
few times on the phone.
Yeah, the only one that there's still some that are uh, that may concern me even in their elder age, but it's not likely that Bruce or Ken will do anything that's going to get them landed right back where they are.
right.
Right.
And I think Andrew, you showed me a photo of Ken, and I think he went from being this young guy with his great looking hair and everything, and now he looks like an elder Asian man. When I seen the last picture
Hey,
of him, I
oh
was
my
like,
God,
he looked
yes.
completely different.
That's so funny. It's funny too because there's some older pictures of Ken that I have seen people like mistake for Ted Bundy. And
Oh,
it's the one where he's at court and it's the profile view. And, he's all dressed up in his suit testifying. And I'm like, I see it, but that's definitely Ken.
yeah. I used to think that Ken would. I think that a lot of people confuse Ken in the heyday and Randy Woodfield as the same
I
person because they,
don't know who that
they
is.
were like he's
Really?
the I-5 uh, K from Oregon. Ann
Okay.
Rule wrote a book on the I-5.
Okay.
Yeah,
He was
Oh,
once
now,
at Green Bay Packers.
speaking of people for like your classes and stuff like that, prison talk's a big thing on here. And And I mean like a big thing where you've got people like there's a guy, Victor Gonzalez, who spent, I think it was 24 years in solitary confinement. And he was in Oregon and he is out and he's all about telling his story.
I
Yeah, I'm
think that
actually going to
that's
see him this summer, hopefully, and hang out with him.
They, him and his cousin apparently like unalived somebody and um, they put him into pieces and sent him to a pig farm. And one of the duffels didn't make it to the pig farm. But he talks about it, and he talks about being a shot caller and stuff like that in prison.
that's the stuff that interests the kids. They love hearing that stuff. That's why Susan was so interesting to them. Just because she would answer their questions, and sometimes uh, they're not so forthcoming.
Right.
Right.
Well, um, again, I I've got a couple of others too that I've connected with on here and on other social media too that, same thing. They're willing to always, share their stories and stuff.
Well,
Oh, sorry, 4.5 years in solitary confinement. It was 20 something years in prison. My bad.
it's still a long time.
Yeah, it is. I had to
All
beat up
right.
Jules for correcting me.
All right. Well, we can round this out tonight. Again, James, thank you. I appreciate it. Like I said, I hope we meet in person sooner than later, and we will certainly do this again in the near future if you're up for it.
Sounds good. Thank
And
y'all
James,
so
I
much.
followed you so I can get your information. I'll send you some of those files.
Oh, thank you so much. I
All
appreciate y'all.
right.
Thank
Well,
you so much.
you guys have a good night, and we'll chat soon. Okay.
All right. Take care.
All right.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
Bye bye.